Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, a nationally ranked community-focused bank with over 30 locations throughout Virginia, Northeast Tennessee, and North Carolina. Who you choose to bank with can make all the difference. Visit firstbank.com to learn more. What's going on, Hokie Nation? A tough one inside Lane Stadium for Virginia Tech football on Saturday. We got David, we got Chris on set. We're ready to unpack it all. It's episode 390 of the Tech Sideline podcast, and it starts right now. And we're recording on Monday, November 11th, 2024 from our high-tech studio in the Virginia Tech Corporate Research Center. Remember to like, subscribe, refer the show to a friend, and head over to techsideline.com to check out our extensive editorial content. Subscriptions are just $12 a month for loads of content. And if you're a Virginia Tech student, of course, your subscription is free. Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company. The Tech Sideline podcast is also brought to you by the Robertson and Cox Real Estate Team. List your property with the RNC team, and not only will it be listed on the MLS as usual, it will also be shown to tens of thousands of visitors to techsideline.com and Tech Sideline social media. Plus, we'll give you a free 1-year subscription to Tech Sideline and a cool piece of Tech Sideline apparel. Visit rncteam.com to contact them and get started today. Well, we got a 3-man crew on this set today. Andy couldn't be with us this morning. I'm your host, Giovanni Heater. To my right, Chris Coleman, our lead analyst and columnist, and across the way, David Cunningham, our managing editor. All right, guys, tough one, 24-14, the final score inside Lane Stadium on Saturday. Number 23, Clemson, comes into town, takes down Virginia Tech. Before we get into the game, I will say, going into it, you knew probably Thursday, Friday, that it was going to be packed because it was like the busiest weekend in Blacksburg. A ton of Clemson fans in town. I think they do that strategically because Clemson wears orange. You got the stripe out. That helps things out a little bit. But traffic was wild. There were a lot of people in town for this one.
Well, one of my friends was in town who I hadn't seen since last football season, I don't think. And so we decided to go out and meet, and we decided to go to Champs. And yeah, I had to stand in line for 30 minutes to get into my home base bar, right? So that's just the way it was. And yeah, so you could tell on Friday night that, oh man, this weekend's different. You know, there were a lot of people in the town this weekend who weren't even going to the game. They were just coming back to be part of the atmosphere and everything like that. And that combined with the new fire marshal cracking down on everything downtown this football season, made for some pretty long lines.
Yes.
My friend Chapel Fowler covers Clemson, and we met for breakfast on Saturday morning before the game, and I'm driving down Main Street, came in from Christiansburg where I live.
Good luck.
And traffic was backed up to Bojangles on Main Street, and I'm like, what in the world is this? And then I got in closer to Kroger and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, there are so many Clemson fans combined with all the Virginia Tech fans coming in. Clemson travels so well, and it was probably the most packed Blacksburg has been in a really long time for a football weekend. I mean, obviously you get a lot of people to come normally, but when you add in a bunch of Clemson fans too, and this is the biggest game of the season at home, it was a busy weekend, and unfortunately the product on the field was probably not what Virginia Tech fans expected.
I made the mistake of hitting the gym on Saturday morning out in Christiansburg, and the commute is typically about 12 minutes from the Planet Fitness in Christiansburg to my place. It was about 45 minutes.
Wow.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I could have gone the highway route. Of course, I forgot my dress shoes somewhere, and I had to pick them up along the way. So I had to go on Main Street, but that was a zoo, no doubt about it. So it was a fun weekend. I think a lot of people enjoyed it, despite the football game. That was kind of the not ideally optimal part of the weekend here. So tough one for the Hokies, like we mentioned. I'll start out by asking you guys, do you think Bashal Tutin and Kyron Drones should have played in this game after seeing it?
Probably not. I think as far as Drones goes, he's a good player, but a certain set of conditions have to exist for him to be an effective player. He has to have full use of his legs, and I thought he started off the game pretty well running. Had a 9-yard run on the second play of the game. Had a couple decent runs on options to the outside, but clearly not quite himself. I mean, he came out the second half with a brace on his knee, for goodness sake. So of course he's not himself. And then number 2, for the passing game to be successful, there has to be the threat of a running game. And when you only give your running backs a combined 4 carries the entire game, there's not a threat of a running game. So they basically, by default, like pigeonholed him into a pocket passer, which is something I think we're all in agreement that that's just not his strength as a football player. So for 3 quarters, they tried to run that offense, and for 3 quarters, they didn't score an offensive touchdown. And I thought they had a great plan for the absence of those guys against Syracuse last week and did a fantastic job. But this week it was just the opposite. I don't understand how you can not have any, well, not any running backs, but Tootin's your only running back that gets any carries, and he had 4. Coney, who rushed for 96 yards against Syracuse last week, he was on the field for 30 snaps. They just didn't give him the ball. Like at some point, like basically when Drones was at quarterback, it was 9 on 11 because Drones couldn't be effective because of his leg and the circumstances of the game, and you weren't using your running back at all. So you were just at a disadvantage there from the very beginning. So yeah, I think you've got to try to work in the running game. You got to. I mean, yes, you're missing a couple of key guys there, but at the same time, you have to also look at Clemson's weakness. They were 95th in the country in yards per carry allowed coming into that game. They haven't done a great job stopping the run. So I don't think Virginia Tech was going to win that game either way. I think Clemson is better, and when you have key players like that are limited, your chances of winning go down. But at the same time, I don't think the players were put in the best position to succeed. And, even when they brought in Schlee in the fourth quarter, he's kind of similar to Drones in that, he needs a running game to help him in the passing game. And at that point, it was 21-7 with 12 minutes left, and the running game is kind of out the window. So, yeah, I would have liked to have seen what could have happened with a different type of game plan, because the defense hung in there for so long. I mean, that game was either tied or Virginia Tech had the lead for over half the game. There was multiple opportunities for Virginia Tech to make adjustments to their offensive game plan, and they just never did it.
You know what this game reminded me of a little bit? Last year's Purdue game, which ironically is the only other time under Brent Pry Tech has rushed for fewer than 40 yards.
Yeah.
Tech didn't really have a running game in that game, and Grant Wells was a little bit banged up for part of it, and it was obvious that Tech was kind of one-dimensional and not lacking a dimension, period. I don't think it was a bad idea to play Drones and Tootin because you want your best players on the field, but I think it was kind of obvious, like Chris said, that Drones was not 100%, and it was obvious that Tootin was trying to give it a go. I don't think the Tootin one is as bad. I think that it's more of how you factor them into the game plan, and I think if Tootin can't go, okay, the biggest problem is Tech was already down Malachi Thomas. Malachi Thomas, we were informed before the game, just had an injury and couldn't go. So you're down your number 2 running back, and your number 1 running back's hurt. You're either going to give your number 3 running back carries or you're not, and they chose to not. And I think when you choose to do that, and it'd be one thing if Drones was healthy, but with him not being, you're basically just backing yourself into a corner a little bit. And we talked a little bit earlier this season about just Drones being, Drones was trying to be more of a pocket passer. And I think in that Miami-Stanford game, he kind of broke out of it a little bit. And, they moved him out of the pocket. And we didn't see that much at all. The 1 or 2 times we did, he missed a wide open throw to Aiden Green, right? So I think maybe not a bad decision to play them, but at the same time, you have to look at the circumstances. And I think they brought in Schlee a little too late. The game was kind of already over at that point. You obviously want to give your number 1 quarterback the opportunity to go out there and play, but I think it was kind of obvious by halftime that this was not Drones being his best self because he was banged up. And you combine that with Tootin, and it's like this offense is kind of just taking on water a little bit.
And that was my next question for you guys. Would you have liked to see Colin Schlee come in sooner, maybe after the halftime break? Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I wrote yesterday that I think everybody has a time on Saturday where they realized that they probably needed to make a change at quarterback because of Drones' injury. I started thinking that probably midway through the second quarter, and it certainly decided by halftime that it needed to be done. But took them an extra quarter, and that's a little bit too long.
Yeah, I agree with Chris, but I think the bottom line is back to the game plan part, right? And like thinking about this game, what did Virginia Tech do so well against Syracuse? Used motion, kind of got Syracuse off balance by running the ball. Mm-hmm. The Hokies didn't run the ball in this game. They didn't try to run the ball. And so I wonder, like, if that's part of why they didn't put Schley in earlier, just because it's like, okay, we're not really going to run the ball as much. You know, we didn't really use our running backs. We only have, again, 4 carries. I mean, I don't think Drones was terrible. I mean, he did have a couple, like he had that 30-yard pass to Daquan Felton. Yeah. But again, if you're the Clemson defense, it lets you tee off on Drones a little bit, right? You just pin your ears back and go and hope your guys in man coverage hold up well.
If you know there's not going to be a handoff at a certain point.
And that freshman cornerback, I mean, he made like a gnarly, like one-handed snag. I mean,
but that was wildly underthrown, and they went to the same throw. I mean, Drone side. Okay, it worked. Let's run it the exact same thing again, and then
it's crazy. You go from being really excited about a big play, and then the very next play, you're like, oh wow, what an interception!
That was a crazy play. But I think that yes, Schley might have been better if Schley came in earlier, but I also think the game plan Tech came out with was not very good, and Pry. When we asked Pry about, I think it was Andy who specifically asked Pry about the running game after the game. Pry was kind of just like, yep, that was the game plan. You know, we knew Bashal was going to be banged up and we knew Malachi was going to be hurt. So, you know, that was the game plan we went with. And it's like,
he said, it is what it was, right?
Pretty much, yeah.
I think that was
nearly word for word. So part of me wonders, like, I don't know if Schley would have really made a difference. Part of it looks like yes, because he led the touchdown drive. Mm-hmm. But that was also so late in the game, you never really know.
Sure. I think it's a shame. And Schley played a nice game. So did Coney. So did Malachi Thomas on the road at Syracuse. But then you see Syracuse this past week gives up over 300 yards on the ground to Boston College. And you just have to sit there and think like, man, we know that Malachi Thomas and Jeremiah Coney are no Bashal Tootin. And you can't help but sit there and think like, would have been nice to have those guys on the road last week, and maybe things would look a little bit different. You knew Tootin was severely banged up because he had just 4 carries in this game, amassing 0 yards. David, you had mentioned it, took till inside the 2-minute timeout to score its first offensive, not just touchdown, offensive
to get in the red zone.
To get in the red zone and to put points on the board as an offense. Going through the drive chart, I mean, there's really no positives for Virginia Tech until that touchdown at the tail end here. You pull it up in the stats, they go punt, fumble, punt, field goal attempt, halftime, punt, interception, turnover on downs, punt, interception, and then the touchdown on the last offensive drive of the game. I mean, ran 58 plays to Clemson's 80, outgained 378 to 288. Tech averaged just 3.9 yards per play. It was rough.
David said it reminded him of the Purdue game last year. The game it reminded me of was 2014 Miami, when Virginia Tech didn't score a touchdown until the last drive of the game with the backup quarterback.
That's what Carter Hill said.
Right, exactly. Now the difference is, they did score a special teams touchdown in this game earlier, but as far as offensive touchdowns go, shut out until the very last possession of the game. And again, it is difficult when you've got backups in there. But like I said, I felt like that they could have made things a little bit easier on the guys they did have by making a few different decisions.
Yeah, and the thing that interests me, and hopefully, I'm sure we'll ask Pry about this week, but the Coney thing, right?
Right.
I mean, I get he fumbled last game and that was bad, but they also wheeled him out for interviews on Wednesday, right?
Right.
We talked to him this week. We also talked to Malachi Thomas, which is kind of ironic. But like, Coney played pretty well. He had more rushing yards on that final drive of the first half against Syracuse than Virginia Tech did as a team against Clemson. And this is not
on one play.
Exactly.
47-yarder.
And this is not your vaunted Clemson defense. This is a unit that came in about 96th, I believe, in allowing yards per carry.
Yeah.
Run the ball. And I think, it's one thing when you throw out Drones, who's not 100% healthy, but they could have made it a little bit easier on him if they had given the running back some games.
Yeah, at some point, if you're a Clemson defender, you just figure out they're not going to hand it off to the running back, so I'm going to cheat. I'm going to cheat on my assignments. And I'm sure that's what they did, and that gives you an opportunity to tee off on the offense and everything like that. I think I'd be disappointed if I was Coney if I had a game like that. Maybe part of it is trust with the fumble and everything like that, but it's like Bishal Tutin's fumbled 9 times in his Virginia Tech career. It's not like he doesn't fumble.
Right.
That's a pretty high number.
Drones has fumbled too.
Drones fumbles a lot.
He fumbled in this game.
Drones doesn't carry the ball tight to his body. And the one play he was sacked, while he was getting sacked, he actually transferred the ball from his right hand to his left hand in the middle of the sack. And I couldn't believe he didn't drop the football. And so Tech has guys that aren't exactly careful with the football. And Jeremiah Coney fumbles once, and that was actually a legit fumble. The defender put his helmet on the ball, and it was a good play by the defender. So I don't know if that factored into their thinking at all, but if it did, it shouldn't have, because at that point you have to take the risk anyway, because he's your only running back. Your only healthy running back, so you at least have to give him the ball a few times somehow. But it is what it is.
Gio, the interesting thing is, like looking at the drive chart, it wasn't like Tech didn't have any good plays at all. I mean, there were a couple times, like that first play of the second drive of the game, they had I believe a chunk play to Benji Gosnell to start the drive.
Yep.
And then it just
on first down.
And then they stall, right? Drones has a fumble on the next series. They punted from the Clemson 49-yard line on the 4th series of the game.
They had a screen pass to Tutin at one point. That went,
yeah. On the, and maybe and this is kind of, I think, maybe damned if you do, damned if you don't, and you're always going to question it if it goes wrong, but praise it if it goes right. That 5th possession of the game Virginia Tech had, where John Love missed a 55-yard field goal. And that's the only one he's missed this year that wasn't blocked. Virginia Tech had the throwback pass. Aiden Green, I believe, threw it back to Kyron Drones, and that's something where you're kind of knocking on the door there around the 35-yard line, and you move the ball okay. If you play it safe there, I mean, are you setting yourself up for potentially to go into half up 10? I don't know, and that's something I think it's like hindsight's 20/20.
It is, and I didn't hate the call, because I think if a lot of plays like that have worked for Virginia Tech
all year. But now we're in November and it's been on tape a lot.
Well, not that particular play.
Not that particular play.
If you go back and look at it, Tech did something different. All 5 offensive linemen laid down on the ground at the snap. So all of a sudden, the Clemson defenders are like, what in the world is going on? And then they got up and they moved to the right. And if you look at the film, 10 of Clemson's 11 defenders were fooled.
Except
that one guy made a play.
One guy, sure.
So, you have to so I didn't think it was a bad call. I could say it was a bad call because Drones was gimpy, and maybe he shouldn't have been if you're going to run a trick play, fine, maybe it needs to be a different trick play, and you're not throwing it to your gimpy guy, because it looked like a healthy Drones makes it in for a touchdown right there. If you'd caught it, it would fool that defensive end. But who knows with an injured Drones? But still, like, I don't hate the decision to, all right, you're up 7-0. Let's go up 14 at halftime and really make it tough on Clemson.
They blocked that one guy. It's probably a touchdown.
Right. Oh, 100%. I don't hate it at all, especially because of how much it's worked all year. To Chris's point, I think the thing that was so not frustrating about it, but it was the play coming out of a timeout. And again, it has nothing to do with the play call, but all of a sudden, like you said, all this momentum, you're getting down into Clemson territory. That was the most productive the offense had looked all day. And in one play, especially because it was out of the timeout, it just took all the wind out of the sails.
Right. Yeah. And lost 9 yards.
Yeah.
And then you're looking at 2nd and long, and then, John Love makes that field goal, it's 10-0 at half. But at the same time, I think that, like you said, Gio, offense's best drive. Yeah. And so it's like, I think in that moment, you gotta capitalize there. And how could the game have shifted around? I don't know. I mean, it's not like the offense was steamrolling down the field every play. This was kind of a one-time thing, but yeah. And then you look at the second half drives, 2 3-and-outs, a punt after Drones was sacked. Schley, man, he had that where he tried to stretch the ball out on 4th down, and he was
almost
short.
Made a heck of a play.
Tech probably should have, run it up real quick to line and call the play, and that gets overturned. That drive was actually going pretty well until Schley didn't get it, but
they had a drop on 3rd down later in the game too when Schley was at quarterback.
I think not a lot of consistency across the board.
I think one of the biggest things we're going to look back on and say, well, that was a big bummer And there's a lot of them, right? Because the losses are starting to pile up, though. But the what could have been with Bashal Tootin. He's been 49 yards shy of a 1,000-yard rushing season since that Georgia Tech game, guys. Didn't play last week and then didn't amass a single yard on 4 carries this week. I mean, you take 2 games away from a guy that shows he's capable for running for 266 in a game. Yeah. It just kind of tanks his what could have been a very historic season.
Do you remember 2020 when Khalil Herbert returned the 1 kickoff at the beginning of the game and they realized he wasn't healthy, so they took him out? But that counted as a game played, and it killed his average for the season.
Was it the Duke?
It was a Liberty game.
The Liberty, yeah. I do remember that.
Yeah. And so like playing Tootin in this game, he finished with 0 yards, and that kind of kills his yards per game average.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly what it is, but it really eats into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he kind of continues to fall. He'll probably fall out of the top 10 nationally.
And at one point, he kind of re-injured it during the game, too.
Yeah, it looked like his ankle got kind of rolled up on by a defender. Yeah, I think...
And he didn't come back after that, right? Correct me if I'm wrong. I thought that's when he was done for the day.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
I think in the big picture, Gio, I think if you're a Virginia Tech fan, you're probably looking at this team and going, man, it's a real bummer that we're sitting here at 5-5 because some of the talent on this roster is pretty elite. Mm-hmm. You've got a really good running back in Bashal Tootin. You've got the nation's sack leader on the defensive side of the ball in Antoine Powell-Ryland. I think you've got some really talented guys in Aeneas Peebles, Mansour Delane, and other spots. You got a pretty good core of receivers, and it just has not clicked all year. I mean, it's been a little bit hit or miss. Every game is different, obviously, but I think in this one there just wasn't enough consistency across the board offensively. The defense played pretty well for the majority of the 60 minutes, I thought.
I'll credit Carter with this, and I think somebody on the set originally had said this, but it's kind of the whack-a-mole reference, right? Where, okay, every week it's something different. We fixed one problem. Like last week it was the defensive collapse. Okay, we whacked that one down, and then this week the defense is great in the first half. Mm-hmm. And we're going to get into talking about the defense, but then a different problem comes up, and it's like you're sitting here all season.
I think that was Andy that said that.
Yeah, I think it was Andy, and there's no consistent issue or anything. It's always something different each week.
Yeah, I actually put on the boards yesterday after I wrote my article. I said, I've gone back and forth. I'm trying to figure out which coordinator I like the best. And for the last few weeks, I was 100% convinced that Bowen was the best coordinator on the staff. And then after Saturday's game, I'm not so sure. I haven't flip-flopped again. Like, my opinion on the coordinators is as inconsistent as the team's performances over the last couple of years. So I guess that probably kind of tells the tale right there. You just don't know what you're getting on a week-to-week basis.
Yeah, I think we saw the lows of the Virginia Tech defense last week, and then we saw the highs in the first quarter. I mean, Virginia Tech had 3 sacks and a pick against a pretty good Clemson offense in the first quarter alone, right? Same thing for the offense, right? You rush for 249 yards last week with 3 backups, a backup quarterback and 2 backup running backs. Then you can't, you barely hit 40 yards against this week. So, like you said, you just don't know what to expect. And I think that's the tough thing is for us to pick. When we pick the games, and we were sitting here going, oh, yeah, this is what we expect. And we just get something we get something completely different. And I think for a Virginia Tech fan, it's probably very frustrating because you're sitting here going, okay, we're really good in this area. Why is it, high, ebbing and flowing like this, right? Why is it a kind of a roller coaster?
When you got so many seniors and so many experienced players. Like, seniors are supposed to be consistent.
Yeah.
Right? And Tech has a ton of seniors on this football team.
Yeah. I got injuries kind of mess with that a little bit, but I mean, the team has been pretty healthy on the defensive side.
Yeah, absolutely.
Too. So, yeah.
My fear is like, I don't know how you get any more talented than this. Like, there has to be some form of drop off next year because you go to that experience and you invested all this in keeping all these guys around. Like, this is probably the most talented roster, year to year that you could ask for.
I think it's Virginia Tech's most talented roster since 2017.
Yeah.
It says a lot.
And they're going to win. I mean, they could win their next 2 and then win a bowl game and win 8. And in which case that would be tied for their most wins since 2017. And so at that point, maybe we couldn't complain very much. But the likelihood of winning 3 games in a row is, well, they've only done it once during the prior era, so it probably won't happen. They'll drop one in there somehow. But I think when you go back before the season, and Price said they would be disappointed if they weren't playing for an ACC title. And I remember I ran a poll after spring practice, and I said, basically the question was, what's the worst Virginia Tech has any business doing? And what's the lowest you can see their record being this year? And most people's base expectations were either 8-4 or 9-3. So we'll call it 8.5.
Sure.
So it's perfectly reasonable, I think. I mean, when we interviewed Drones down in Charlotte, he was talking playoffs, and I know what this team is capable of, is what he told me. And so I think everybody's disappointed. I mean, the fans are disappointed. Obviously, the players are going to be more disappointed than anyone. They have to go through it. But this is a program that has been starved of success for entirely too long, and people are getting a little bit impatient, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And clearly, this team is pretty talented, considering every single game it's played, except for this past one, was close. We've hit on it so much, but when you lose, when your 4 losses entering this week were all by 1 score, you're in those games. You're in every single one, and I think.
And you're winning this one at halftime.
Yeah, and I think for a multitude of factors, obviously the games have not gone their way. Those games, I think yes, I think you can be a little bit more talented, maybe, but the talent comes from getting the right guys in and developing them. I don't know. It would be tough for Tech to have a better group of more experienced and more talented players that are returning.
The right mix of talent and experience.
Because Tech could go out and get a bunch of really good guys in the portal and bring in a bunch of high-profile recruits, but it takes time for everybody to be on the same page. And I think that is probably the most disappointing thing, is that we talked about before the season. You all have every single starter except for tight end returning. Half the defensive starters are back, and then you plug holes with Aeneas Peebles and some of the other guys up front, right? You bring in Sam Brumfield. In theory, on paper, this is a team that should be improving, and yet we're sitting here again, and they're 5-5.
Right, and I know we're talking about this after the Clemson game, but I picked Virginia Tech to lose to Clemson last week, and I picked them to lose to Clemson before the season. So it's not the Clemson game that has us making judgments on the program or the coaching staff or anything like that. It's just when you lose some of those games earlier in the season, like when you lose to a very mediocre Rutgers team, and I'm being generous when I say mediocre, when you lose to them at home, and then when you blow a 21-3 lead against Syracuse and things like that, you don't leave yourself any margin for error. So then later on, when you lose the game that you're supposed to lose, it's like
you're 5-5.
Yeah, you have to win that game to make up for it, but you really that's very difficult to do. Yeah. So they dug themselves a hole early, and whatever happens from here on out is the result of digging that hole.
Well, as always, Tech Sideline is presented by First Bank and Trust Company, where exceptional customer service comes first. First Bank and Trust Company offers a variety of checkings and savings account options that are sure to meet your banking needs. That includes free checking, so visit firstbank.com to find the account that's right for you. Before we talk about this defense, I know that we do have some stat time thanks to Scott Glesner. So, Chris, I'll toss it over to you.
Let me pick some here since we were just finished talking about the offense. Virginia Tech failed to gain 4+ yards per play in their last 2 home games. The last time Virginia Tech failed to gain 4+ yards per play in 2 consecutive home games was 1988 versus number 10 West Virginia and number 8 South Carolina. In both instances, VT failed to gain 250 yards of offense. Now, that was a long time ago. That was in Beamer's second year, and that was against 2 top 10 teams.
Yeah,
with South Carolina. Yeah, that was a long, long time ago. Let's see. Tech is averaging 63.7 offensive plays per game this season. That would be the lowest average since 2009. Remember how we talked about last week? I think Andy brought this up, that Clemson had scored in 25 straight quarters against Virginia Tech.
Yep, and did not score in the first
Shut them out. Yep, Virginia Tech, first time Virginia Tech has shut out Clemson in the first half since 1998 when the Hokies led 34-0 at halftime in Death Valley and went on to win 37-0. That was back when Clemson wasn't very good.
Sure.
You probably can't even imagine that, but they used to not be very good. Now, let's see. I'll flip it over to defense now, since we're about to go into the defensive phase of our podcast. Tech has only allowed 9 points in the first half of their last 5 games. However, they have allowed 87 points in the second half of those 5 games, including overtime. So those are the ones I want to talk about. So that kind of brings me back to what we've been saying about Marv and Bowen. Bowen, it kind of seems like if he gets the initial game plan right, things go really, really well, and then he doesn't adjust well during the game. Marv seems like he's really good at getting the initial game plan down. At least he has been, the last month and a half of the season, but then struggles to make adjustments at halftime. And I don't know if you can completely say that this game was adjustments based, because there were some key mistakes by players, more so than I think it was scheme. But at any rate, no matter how you slice it, the Virginia Tech defense does not perform well in the second half after they performed very well in the first half.
Yeah, I think what stands out to me, I think I said it last week, talking to Jaden Keller after that Syracuse game, and I think it applies a little bit, maybe not as much to this game, but he was like, I thought in the first half we came out on fire and they didn't really adjust Syracuse to what we were doing. And then, I thought we didn't really adjust to what they were doing in the second half when they adjusted. So, it's a cat and mouse game. And that's what I think Virginia Tech fans were spoiled a little bit with Bud Foster for so long, because he was so good at adjusting. Gio, the ACC announced that the Virginia Tech Duke game is an 8 o'clock kickoff on ACC Network. And based on the replies to my tweet that I just tweeted the news, seems like Virginia Tech fans think it's like cruel and unusual punishment for
to wait all day
to play an 8 o'clock game, play a night game. Anyway, let's talk about the defense.
Duke has earned their night games, man. They're
absolutely 7-3. I mean, imagine that. I think it was you who wrote that. If Duke beats Virginia Tech and Wake Forest, that's a 9-3 team.
I mean, if SMU wasn't unbeaten in the league right now, then you're talking Manny Diaz for Coach of the Year, and it'd be well deserved. And maybe he'll end up winning it anyway. Who knows?
But it's a shame there's 17 teams. Yeah. I like Andy's idea of having to play a semifinal.
I agree.
Ooh, I like that.
But regardless, and it does almost feel like a little bit of a slap in the face too when Tech fans are like, man, I'd really like to see that Syracuse game be a night game, noon. Man, I'd really like to see that Clemson game be a night game. We'll give you 3:30. The second half will be in the dark.
Man, I'd really like the Duke game to just be a nooner so we can get it over with.
Exactly.
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock at night. And Andy and you hated an 8 o'clock road game.
Well, I'm not going to be there.
Okay,
I'll be covering I'll be covering basketball. Yeah. I feel bad for Andy because, Andy and I have a running joke back and forth that every single time because we trade off who writes our game story each week, and every single time he's written a game story, it's been usually a very late game or a game with a lot of controversy. He wrote the Miami game story. He wrote the Syracuse game story. He wrote the Vanderbilt game story. Meanwhile, I got Stanford, Marshall,
the boring ones,
Clemson.
Yeah.
So he gets another night game, but the women have a game that day, and then I'm hitting the road to go to Florida the next day to cover basketball. So, no more regular season football for me to cover, unfortunately.
Yeah, we're heading up north for Thanksgiving, and
is it really that unfortunate though?
Oh, I'm excited to spend a week in Florida.
Exactly.
Hopefully,
that's what I'm saying.
Hopefully, cover some good basketball. But we're going to talk basketball on Thursday.
Thursday we'll do basketball.
Basketball's on Thursday. Talking about this defense, all things considered, I thought, like you guys said, they played a really good first half, kept the team in the game for the most part. And again, when you're going 3 and out, when you're turning the football over on offense, defense was on the field. What felt like all night.
Yeah, let's see. Clemson ran 80 plays, and where's time of possession, David? If you see it before 36-49 for Clemson.
That 23-11.
Yeah, that and that first quarter was what really set it apart. Clemson had the ball for 11 minutes 24 seconds of the first quarter. So
that's crazy.
And in the third quarter, it was 10-01. There was only one of the 3 quarters where Virginia Tech had a time of possession advantage, and that was the second quarter, and that was marginal by like 30 seconds. So, or 20 seconds, excuse me. So defense was on the field a lot. I don't know if you could say they wore down because they really they broke on the first 2 drives of the second half. You would like to see them hang on a little bit longer, and they made mental mistakes on those 2, well, physical and mental mistakes on those first 2 drives. I don't think it was a case of them being tired. I think it's more of a case of you can't expect to shut Clemson out for 80 plays, right? You're gonna break at some point, and it happened a little bit earlier than I would have hoped it did, but at the same time, I wouldn't have thought that you could shut them out for an entire half of football. I thought that was an exceptional effort by the Virginia Tech defense, and in the grand scheme of things, I picked Clemson to score 31 points. They scored 24. 3 of those were off a turnover. So if you told me before the game the Virginia Tech defense is basically going to hold Syracuse to 21 points, Clemson. It's the orange is throwing me off. They're going to hold Clemson at 21 points. I would have taken that and said, okay, we'll have a chance to win the football game.
I thought the defense was great. I think the bummer was that, especially in the first half, it played so well and didn't have the offense to go with it. And, Chris, you mentioned the time of possession. I went back and found one of my tweets. Kyron Drones fumbled on the second play of Virginia Tech's 3rd drive. It was at the start of it was Tech's first drive of the second quarter. Again, the Virginia Tech defense had just been on the field for 11 minutes and 26 seconds. The Tech offense had been on there for 3:43, and Drones fumbled and gave Clemson the ball right back. And again, I don't know that was that big of a difference, but if you're able to chew some clock and move the ball a little bit, it makes a difference. I thought you mentioned Keontae Jenkins in your column yesterday. I thought he was terrific.
He was.
That first drive of the game, Antoine Powell-Ryland has a sack on that intentional grounding penalty, which gives him 13 on the year. He is now 5th all-time at Virginia Tech with 22 and a half sacks.
Okay. Wow.
So thank you for answering that question, not to interrupt you, because Carter and I calling the game were like, where did APR get a sack? We didn't say it on the air, but to ourselves, it's the intentional ground. So now we've solved the mystery that I've been pondering for 2 days now. So thank you, David.
A quick APR tangent. He's behind Bruce Smith, Cornell Brown, Corey Moore, and John Engelberger, all time at Virginia Tech.
So that makes sense. That would have been my top 4 guesses. Yeah.
And then Moose Phillips tips up that pass for Jalen Jones to pick it off on the first drive of the game. The second drive of the game, Cole Nelson had that huge sack on 4th down.
Yeah.
And I think there was a little bit of a holding on Keontae Jenkins, the little rubber out with the receiver, but
Dabo was going off on that one on the sideline.
But Tech, that's. Tech gets a pick. Tech gets off the field. Then you have the block field goal.
Yep.
Tech forces a punt. Tech forces another punt, which was the pooch punt, which was very, 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 very weird.
I thought it was actually really smart because it kept the ball out of Jalen Lane's hands. And to that point, that was probably the most dangerous person Virginia Tech could have had on the field is an open space Jalen Lane.
Not wrong.
Virginia Tech didn't really give up much at all in the first half. And I thought Keontae Jenkins, I think he is really coming to his own lately. Like he is kind of peaking, playing some of his best football. It reminds me a little bit of, I think it was 2020. It would have been 2022 probably. Jamari Connor and Dax Hollifield. They were both playing so well. They came on as seniors and just it looks like Jenkins knows exactly where he needs to be. The play of the game for him, I thought. I know he had a couple big plays. The 3rd down play before the block field goal, Klubnik kind of bounced off a guy and kind of rolled right and was trying to get to the sticks, and Keontae Jenkins wraps him up and brings him down for a TFL just short of the sticks, and Clemson has to kick a field goal. And then Tech blocked it and returned it, right? He seems like he's flying around making plays constantly. That defense, man, in the first half, I know they were on the field for a long time, but it felt like they just wouldn't budge.
Yeah, I think you kept expecting Clemson to score in the first half. I'm like, oh, this is going to be the drive where they finally break through, and then they never did. So it was just a great effort by Tech. Again, I was hoping they could hold on a little bit longer in the second half, but it happened immediately. And this is where it goes back to consistency of seniors. And you talk about how consistent Keontae Jenkins has been, and absolutely he's been so consistent, especially like his last 5 or 6 games. And Aeneas Peoples has been extremely consistent. The guy who surprised me, who has not been consistent this year, is Dorian Strong. And that Clemson's first touchdown, it was a good route concept. and he bit on the short route, and then boom, just like that, it was over his head. And the second one, Mansour Delane first missed the sack. It was a good call, corner blitz, and it would have worked if Mansour had tackled him, but he didn't. And then Dorian rolled off the coverage instead of staying with his man, and sometimes that can be a bad habit for defensive backs. They think they see a sack, and so that they don't keep up with the guy, and then the sack is broken, and then boom, just like that, it's thrown over their head. So that was 2 straight possessions where it was a mental error by Tech's senior cornerback, who was a dominant football player last year, and just for whatever reason isn't having quite the same season this year.
It seemed like Dorian, and I was actually going to ask you guys what your assessment of him was in that game, because some blown plays, but then there were other times where he was on guys like a glove, it felt like.
Sure. I mean, I think he's been inconsistent this year. I mean, it's fair to say I think he's a talented football player. Clearly he is. Sometimes maybe it doesn't look like he maybe doesn't trust his safeties a little bit, but that excuse would have been there last year too, because the safeties were so inconsistent last year, but that didn't seem to be the case. So I don't know what it is about this year where he just hasn't been quite playing as consistently. I remember the first game of the season against Vanderbilt when everybody went after Delane and he didn't have a good game, but they didn't throw it strong that entire game. And I'm like, oh, it's going to be one of those seasons. And but they've thrown at him, and they've had more success against him this year than they have in quite a long time. Well, I mean, I haven't looked at his PFF numbers, but I think he only allowed 9 completions last year. And it's just a lot more this year, and the play hasn't been quite as consistent. And I didn't expect it to be like that dominant, because I thought last year was a special set of circumstances. Tech didn't play a schedule that had a lot of really good receivers on it, so I thought they were a little bit fortunate from that standpoint. But at the same time, this year, it's been a number of backup quarterbacks on the schedule, and the numbers still haven't quite been there.
That was my follow-up was, does the quarterback, you've played Cam Ward this year, you've played Kyle McCord, you've played Cade Klubnik, 3 of the top quarterbacks in the league, but you played Jordan Travis last year, so...
I don't know how to... I don't really know how to feel. Like, I feel fortunate that Virginia Tech faced so many backup quarterbacks. 4 of their 5 wins were against either backup quarterbacks or quarterbacks who went on to be benched, right? They've lost every game they've played against a good, healthy starting quarterback this year. So that's not good. I mean, I don't know. It's the 10th game of the season. I don't have anything new to say at this point, really. Sure. I also feel fortunate that Tech isn't 4-6.
Yeah.
Sat on this podcast 2 weeks ago
Haynes King,
and said if Haynes King is back for Georgia Tech against Miami, that's going to be Miami's first loss.
You called it.
He was, and it was. And I feel fortunate that he didn't play against Virginia Tech, because then if he had, I'm guessing we're talking about 4-6 right now.
Yeah. I think Haynes King and Georgia Tech are a little bit of Miami's kryptonite. The thing I will say about the corners, I thought that was maybe, I don't know, the defensive line has been pretty good for Virginia Tech all year, but I think you could have said coming in, before we kind of got a feel for how Kelvin Gilliam, we didn't really know that Wilfred Penney was going to come on as well as he has. I think it was kind of like, oh man, the cornerbacks might be Virginia Tech's strongest unit.
Correct.
And I think Dante Lovett's kind of held his own in he's not playing every snap, but he's gotten a little bit more than last year. I think he's been pretty good. I think Mansour Delane's been better. He still had a couple moments. He's made some pretty big plays. But at the same time, between him and Dorian Strong, I think we kind of came into the season thinking this is going to be one of the best cornerback duos in the country.
It's locked down outside the hashes, right? And it hasn't quite been that way.
Exactly. And I think, that's back-to-back weeks where Delane, didn't wrap up on a tackle against Syracuse, goes for a big gain. He had a chance for that sack, and Klubnik wriggled away, and then Dorian Strong kind of isn't in the right position. So I think that's a little bit disappointing if you're a Virginia Tech fan. You're probably sitting there thinking, man, like these guys are really good and really experienced. Why are they getting beat like this? So I think they've been a little bit underwhelming. Not every single game, but for moments here or there. Delane's first game against Vandy was pretty bad. I think they bounced back with some pretty good plays this year. Delane obviously had a forced fumble and a pick, and it feels like he consistently makes some big plays. But at the same time, it's like they've gotten burned on a couple big ones, and it's like, man, if you make one play here or there, that could be game-changing.
wanted to ask you guys last thing really on the Clemson game, and then we're gonna look big picture for a moment before we wrap things up here. Where do you feel like the game took its turn for the worst? I guess for me it would have been that Cade Klubnik. Like, it felt like Cam Ward in Miami, right, where he pitches it out to the tight end just when you think you have him wrapped up in the backfield. In a lot of ways, it was a similar play with the heroics of it, and it felt like that was when the game really flipped on its head.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's when the wind completely came out of my sails, was that second touchdown. Where and what makes it even more of a gut punch is it was 2 plays earlier was when Keontae Jenkins had the strip sack. Yeah. And the ball fell, like there were 2 Tech defenders there, and then I was convinced Tech was going to get the ball. Even when I watched the condensed version of the replay yesterday, the announcers seemed like they thought Tech had the ball too, but somehow a Clemson guy got it, and then 2 plays later, you're missing a sack, and he's throwing a deep ball for a touchdown. And you hadn't scored an offensive touchdown all game. So, yeah, it's only a 7-point game at that point. You're still very much in the football game, except you kind of aren't, because you haven't scored an offensive touchdown all game, and it doesn't seem like you're going to start anytime soon.
Sure.
So, at that point, it's frustrating because you're right there, you're 7 points behind, yet you know that you really don't have much of a chance.
You can't give a team as good as Clemson that many opportunities. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
You get another great play by Keontae Jenkins. You got to fall on that ball. I think, Gio, I kind of knew a little bit on the next drive after Tech goes 3 and out. And at that point, it felt like Clemson's on fire coming out of halftime. Tech had its moment to kind of that was after the first touchdown, I should say, the deep ball down to Turner in the left corner of the end zone. Tech goes 3 and out, and it's like, okay, what is Clemson going to do here? It's a 7-all game, and that offense is looking pretty good, and then Klubnik escapes, and then it's 14-7, and at that point just felt like you said earlier, Gio, all the wind out of Tech sails was just gone. And then Jones gets sacked on that next drive, and Tech has to punt again. And at that point, it just felt like Tech was just treading water a little bit. Couldn't get anything done offensively. You're down. Yeah. One thing, you want to talk about the Quentin Reddish's moment?
Yeah, let's do that. I was going to ask you guys where you think that scales as far as everyone seems to say. Now, it's a little different when you're in the press box. You were in the press box. We had the TV effects in our headset because we had the broadcasting stuff on. So you lose touch with kind of the chaos of the moment as far as what it was like in the stadium. But a lot of people are saying that was one of the loudest moments in recent time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, certainly for this season. I mean, considering who you were playing, the fact that it put Virginia Tech in the lead, I definitely think that ranks up there. I'm trying to think of like my favorite block kicks for touchdowns throughout my time as a fan. I still that was punt. Yeah. So I'm just thinking field goals myself.
If you can't hear Nick, he said 2001 Miami.
Yeah. I am probably thinking 2004 West Virginia when they were ranked in the top 10, and Vinny Fuller took one back, and the Hokies won that game. But yeah, this one was right up there. I think Reddish is like, he's a tall dude, but he can run too. Like, he's got a really bright future. What he's been doing at safety for Tech this year is a true freshman and playing both safety positions. Like, it's hard enough to play as a true freshman one safety position. That's why so few safeties have been able to be effective early in their careers at Virginia Tech throughout history or anywhere else. I mean, Mose Phillips last year struggled mightily as a true freshman. Reddish hasn't really struggled. Like, he looks like a veteran out there. That guy's got a really bright future.
I got a chance. I wrote about Reddish after the game. We got a chance to talk to him, and he's a very humble kid. He said it was the first touchdown he scored since 8th grade.
No kidding.
He'd been playing mostly on the defensive side of the ball.
Wow.
About 5 years ago. I thought he handled it very, very well. I mean, obviously, it's one of those where the ball just pops straight up, and he kind of caught it like a punt.
What was this quote about? I saw where the Clemson players were, and I ran the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
great strategy.
Good strategy.
First of all, that's back-to-back weeks Tech has blocked a kick. Last week, APR kind of jumped over the defender and blocked the PAT. This week, it's Keyshawn Burgos. He kind of just powered through the line and got a hand up there. And, yeah, Reddish catches it, and he's kind of directly in the middle of the field, and all the Clemson players are shifting this way. And he had a couple blockers on that side and kind of just ran around. He took a good choice. I think that was kind of the deciding factor, because if he tries to go this way, he didn't have as many blockers this way, and he's trying to outrace everybody. But he had Mose Phillips and Mansour Delane and Caleb Woodson kind of leading the charge, and what a momentum shift, and for a true freshman to make that play.
And you've always got such an opportunity when you block a field goal or return it for a touchdown, because if you look at the personnel on the field goal kicking team, it's a bunch of linemen and tight ends in there for blocking purposes, and then the holder and the kicker.
Yeah.
So if you get past that first wave, you're pretty much gone.
It's funny. So APR, who blocked the kick last week, was joking with us earlier in the week leading up to the Clemson game. We asked him about that and asked him about Jalen Jones, because Jalen Jones picked it up and had a chance to run it back and got tackled by the holder. And he was like, "Oh yeah, we were making fun of him in the film room this week." But Quentin Reddish actually mentioned that. He was like, Jalen Jones had an opportunity last week, but he had been on the field that entire drive, and then is in that position, picks it up, and is kind of gassed because he had just been playing. He's like, I came on with fresh legs, and a heck of a play for a kid who's probably going to make plays for Virginia Tech for a really, really long time. He's the first Virginia Tech player to return a blocked field goal for a touchdown since Adonis Alexander in 2016 against Duke, which was a 75-yarder. And he's the first true freshman for Virginia Tech to score a touchdown since Tucker Holloway against Georgia Tech in 2022, the punt return. So, I mean, he's a kid who has played pretty well at safety, held up, played a lot of snaps, and man, if Virginia Tech was able to capitalize on it, like that would have been the story of the game. I think back-to-back weeks, it's like, man, you got some guys playing pretty well. Coney, Schlee, Thomas last week kind of did their part. Reddish does his part there. The defense played pretty well, and it's like, man, if Tech could put an entire game together, you'd be talking about some pretty cool moments from some guys who don't usually make plays like that.
I wonder how much coming into the week. I saw something interesting on the Kansas City Chiefs today. They won yesterday by blocking a field goal, and they were breaking it down this morning on ESPN, and they were saying if you watch, they saw something they could exploit. Here they go. They try and attack it. They almost get there. Then they go at the same guy again on the blocking scheme. Then they almost get there again. And they're like, they knew on that last play of the game, they were going to have a good chance to block it if they attacked the same guy with the same people. Finally, they break through and block it to win the game. And that made me think, this Clemson team had 3 blocked last week against Louisville, and two blocked last week. So this was 3 to make it 3, and they had 5 consecutive. It was something like 5 consecutive blocked 5 on the year blocked field goals. Like, there must have been something they saw in the film room. They're like, we can exploit something here.
And that's where you talk about the highs and lows of Virginia Tech special teams this year. There haven't really been any special teams mistakes lately. But obviously, I'm sure Stu Holt would have loved for John Love to make that 55-yard field goal. But at the same time, I mean, what Tech has been able to do these last couple weeks of blocking stuff, I mean, that's pretty good. And what I will say is, Frank Beamer sits in the, like, I sit on the left side of the press box, and Beamer's 2 suites over, and I didn't see him because he was sitting down. He was kind of in the same row as I was, but it was cool to look over there, and all the people in his suite are going up to him and hugging him and stuff. Yeah. And everybody knows how much Beamer ball means to Virginia Tech, and that just really cool moment to a big time game against a top 25 team, and you get it done on special teams early. Like, that's exciting, and that stadium might have been the loudest I've heard all year.
Speaking of Virginia Tech special teams, how about John Parker Romo? Too bad Andy's not here today as a Vikings fan, but John Parker Romo got picked up by the Vikings this past week, and in his first game, kicked four field goals in a 12-7 Vikings win.
Wow.
Responsible for every single point.
Wow. Yep. Good for John Parker Romo.
Yeah.
I think you were asking who's the best coordinator on the team. I think it might be Stu Holt.
No question it's Stu Holt. Fair enough. I just wasn't thinking about special teams, but yes.
Sure. Last thing on the game. Do we know anything about Gabe Williams? Obviously a moment where you hate to see it. Scary moment for sure.
Yeah, Brent Pry said he didn't have an update after the game on Saturday. Just very, very scary. I mean, he left in an ambulance with, I think, his left leg in an air cast. Dabo, I included in my story, Dabo had some really nice things to say after the game about it. Just very scary situation overall. And Really stinks for Gabe Williams. I mean, that was his second defensive snap of the season.
It was his 9th overall snap of the season.
And second on the defensive side of the ball.
That's right.
And he made the play, too. That's what Keontae Jenkins talked about. He said, man, I told, because Gabe Williams plays behind Jenkins at star. He said, man, I told Gabe to just go out and don't stress too much, don't think too much, just go make plays. And, man, he made the play. It's just a bummer there. I haven't heard anything. I'm sure when we talk to Brent this week, he'll give an update.
Hope it's not as bad as it seems.
Sure.
It stinks if it is as bad as it seems. His first year at Virginia Tech was always going to be his most important year because he's got to put on so much mass, right? Because he came in pretty skinny. Guess what he's not going to get to do now in the offseason? Lift weights.
Yep.
Right? Yep. So this puts him, if it's as bad as it seems, it puts him a year behind in his development.
That's a good point. We're definitely thinking about him, his family, no doubt about that. All right, guys, last thing here. This was something that Nick was bringing up before the podcast. You saw Mike Norvell at Florida State. They had just fired their offensive coordinator and defensive coordinator. Granted, they've won one football game. So I think the sirens are going off a little bit more in Tallahassee.
When you've won one football game, you have bigger problems than your coordinators, to be honest with you.
Sure. But I think Virginia Tech fans are starting to get into that headspace a little bit here. Do you think changes are in order? Is that a before the season ends thing? Is that an off-season thing? Where do you sit right now with 2 games left in the regular season? One that's been, frankly, disappointing.
I mean, like always, I want to say you want to let the season play out. The thing is, the coordinators, in my opinion, have been inconsistent. So one week you feel a certain way about them and you're like, oh yeah, this is going to work. This can work. And then the next week you're like, nah, this isn't going to work, right? How are we going to feel after the Duke game? I don't know. Then how are we going to feel after the UVA game? I don't know. It might be 2 totally different feelings. The only thing you can do is, I think, wait until the end and analyze the 3 years as a whole of what you got. I don't know where that will lead. I know defensively, Marv was Pry's number 1 choice because they're running Pry's personal defense, his own personal scheme. If he wants to continue to run his own personal scheme, but he didn't think Marv was the guy for it, then he would have to find someone else who knows how to run his own scheme. I don't know who that would be. You limit your choices very much.
Yep.
So he would either have to take it over himself, hire somebody and teach him his scheme, which you don't really want to do, or hire somebody and let them run their own scheme. And I don't know if Pry would want to do that part of it. So I don't know what he would do on that side of the ball. And I know they're not in an easy situation. They hired both those coordinators, They signed them to contract extensions after last year too. So if you wanted to buy either one of them out, you'd have to buy out 2 years. If you wanted to buy out both of them, you'd end up buying out 4 years. It's a lot of money.
Yep.
And it's probably why they shouldn't have been signed to extensions after last year when they still had another year left on their contract. When it was not like anybody was beating down their doors to hire them. It was just a loyalty thing. And sometimes I think this school takes loyalty to past the point it needs to be taken. So I don't know. I don't know how that's going to work out, and I wouldn't want to make a decision right now on it anyway. But I think it's been a disappointing season, and I don't know if Virginia Tech's going to beat Duke. I've been saying I think Virginia Tech's going to beat Duke because Duke's offense isn't good, but then Duke turns right around and beats NC State. It looked like they were dropping off a little bit, but then they turn around and beat NC State. They're 15th in the country in yards per play allowed on defense. They're second in the country in turnovers forced, right? So they're a scrappy team with a winning culture that just know how to win football games. They'll scrap you for every inch to the end, and this just isn't the type of team that Virginia Tech beats. So let's say the Hokies go 6-6. How could you not make some kind of a change? When you said before the season that you'd be disappointed if you didn't make the ACC title game, you got a bunch of seniors, coaches that you trust, and then you don't get it done. What's the reason for that, right? I feel like you would have to throw the fan base a bone in some way, shape, or form. But again, that's looking down the road a little bit too far, I think. But yes, fans have been talking about that. Fans have been talking about that since last year. I mean, all fans talk about that.
Fans love to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, most fan bases talk about that anyway to a certain extent. But yeah, I do wonder if Virginia Tech painted themselves into a difficult corner when they signed those guys to extensions after the last season when they didn't need to.
You mentioned Duke, Chris. You want to know what Tech's record against Duke is coming off an open week?
Oh, do I want to know?
0-2.
Yeah.
2013, they lost 13-10 in Blacksburg.
That was a fun one. Both quarterbacks threw 4 interceptions. It was a beautiful
nice.
Offensive football
and
game.
The glorious 45-10 game in 2019.
Oh, that was off a bye week. Mm-hmm. That's right. It was, wasn't it?
Friday game.
Yep.
Yeah. I thought Will Stewart did a really good job of kind of painting this exact picture last week in his Monday Thoughts. He kind of compared it to what Frank Beamer did, I believe, after the 92 season. Like Brent Pry's going to have to look in the mirror. He's going to have to do some self-reflection and go, what do we need to succeed, right? I think loyalty is always an interesting thing in this business because a lot of coaches are so well connected. At some point, though, you have to, I think, if you want to succeed, put the program's best interests over maybe sometimes what you would rather do, right? I'm not saying that either guy needs to be fired, but you got to take a look at it. Maybe Tech needs somebody to kind of a Jerry Keel type guy to come in and just kind of look at the program and go, what needs to be fixed? Though I do think that there are a handful of guys on the staff with head coaching experience that probably have some pretty good opinions on it, right? Think about Sean Quinn. He's been head coach before. Brent Davis has been offensive coordinator. There are guys who have been pretty high up. I think it's a lot about self-reflection. I think there's been so much inconsistency, like Chris said, and it hasn't just been a 1-year thing. It's been a 3-year thing. And it's one thing in year 1 when you're still trying to figure it out. It's a little bit different thing in year 2 when you steadily improved. This was the year you were supposed to be better. And I think if you want to take the program to the next level, you have to figure out what needs to be fixed and how to do it. And you've got to have the right system set up, I think, going into next year. Whether that's different staffers, whether that's Pry has somebody to help him with clock management, game management, right? I think this offseason is going to be big, but I would let the season play out because there's no point in trying to screw up stuff now. You need to win 1 of 2 games at least and go to a bowl game.
Yeah, and let me say this, this was a thread on our boards this morning, and I chimed into it. People are saying he's learning on the job as a CEO. He's 54. He's going to be 55 in April. Like, this is not a young coach.
Sure.
Right? He started coaching as soon as he got out of college. So he's basically so that's over 30 years ago. He's in his final quarter in his coaching career, basically. Right? This is not a young, inexperienced guy. When Beamer made all those changes after 92, not only with his coaching staff, but with how he ran the program behind the scenes, he was still only 46. He had a lot of years ahead of him. And he had more experience as a head coach than Brent Pry did, but less experience as a coach. And honestly, less experience in a big-time program than Pry had when he came here. Like, whatever CEO skills Pry lacks or doesn't lack, I don't know. Like, he should have learned from all those years at Penn State. It's not like this is the first Power 5 school he's coached at. He's been around a Power 5 coach. He's been around. His dad was a head coach. Right? Wasn't his dad a head coach? Or was he? I don't remember if he was a head coach or coordinator, but he grew up in a football household.
I want to say his dad was head coach like D3 in West Virginia.
Yeah, so like this isn't something that like is going to magically snap on for a 55-year-old man, most likely. I don't disagree on hiring help and everything like that, but it's going to take more than that, in my opinion.
Agreed. Yeah. Systematic changes, kind of. Again, and it kind of how maybe you have to change how you run your program, and that's I think the important thing in the offseason, sitting down and going, what do we need to do to get better, and are these guys, the people we have in place, are they the right people to get the job done? Right. And you have to be, I don't know if brutal is the right word, but you have to be brutally honest, probably.
You have to have a hard conversation.
And he loves
Brent loves the hard conversation.
I think that's going to be the tough part. We've seen the highs and lows across the board. Some games, Tyler Bowen and his unit they're great. Sometimes Chris Marvin, his unit are great, right? But why isn't it, consistent? And It is football. It is a game that's ever changing after all, but it's going to take a big hard look in the mirror, I think, and kind of, they're probably going to have to deep dive it a little bit and go, hey, look at the overall way they run things and, hey, are we doing the right things here? What do we have to do? Can we change this up? We'll see. I don't think there's anything that can really be done right now because you still got to go worry about winning these last 2 football games, but they're going to have a lot of time in December and January to kind of turn things around. And the bottom line is, if there was ever a year to do it, it'd be this year.
Yeah.
I mean, you're going to have so much roster turnover, good and bad. I mean, like you're going to have so many veteran guys leave. Antoine Powell-Ryland, Aeneas Peebles, Bashal Tootin, a lot of those receivers, Jalen Lane, Daquan Felton, Ollie Jennings, Stephen Gosnell. I mean, there's going to be a lot of youth coming up through the ranks. A lot of guys that this staff has developed. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I keep calling him Cole Woodson. That's his brother.
Yeah.
Caleb Woodson, the Dante Lovitz, right? The Jeremiah Coneys. You're going to have a lot of your guys, Aiden Green. They're going to be stepping into prominent roles, right? So I think there's a lot of hope, but at the same time, it feels like they're going to have to do something a little bit differently if they want this program to kind of get to the next level.
Forget the Duke game. One thing that cannot be afforded is a loss to Virginia.
Oh my gosh, absolutely not.
Because that's one thing even Justin Fuente only did once, and he lost to the best Virginia team on the road in the last 20 years.
Exactly.
You can't lose to Virginia.
And it took Tech's best player being out for that game for it to happen. So, that can't happen. My concern is losing to Duke, and then that UVA game becomes about bowl eligibility, and it would be
that's never happened before, right?
Right. And this year it would be the same for UVA. They're at 5 wins. They probably won't win.
What a win over Pitt!
It was a huge win, but who they still got? SMU and Notre Dame. Yeah, they're not going to win those games most likely. So it could be that game is for a bowl game spot, right? And Virginia Tech has won that 100% of the time against UVA throughout the course of history.
However,
but if you keep doing the same thing all the time, like putting yourself in the same situation, eventually the result can change. Like your dialogue isn't just going to come up, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So I want to beat Duke and not be in that situation.
Do you remember the reaction after Tech lost that 2019 game?
Unfortunately, yes, I do.
I mean, that was Tech had, that was a crazy season that featured, everybody was down in the dumps on Fuente and the staff after that 45-10 loss to Duke.
And then they won 6 of 7.
They win 6 of 7, the only losses to Notre Dame.
With backup quarterbacks.
With Quincy Patterson starting at quarterback, right? Mm-hmm. They really turned it around. And I think in some ways it felt like all was lost because Tech lost to UVA.
Right. They were coming off back-to-back shutouts before that game.
That was to go to the title game too, right?
Yeah. You got to win UVA. That's the bottom line.
Can't lose to UVA.
And you think people might think that this fan base is not very happy and upset and frustrated right now.
You ain't seen nothing yet. If they lose that game.
I fear to open Twitter if they lose to UVA.
Oh boy.
Yeah. I mean, you think that you think it's bad right now. If this program loses to Virginia, not going to be.
I'll say this: I still think they're a much better football team.
Agreed. Yes,
or more talented football team than Virginia.
Yeah, but again, man, I think if the defense plays like this, Tech's going to have a chance, to do some pretty special things down the stretch here. But the bottom line is, I think this open week, you got to get your guys healthy.
At this point, I'm rooting for that Fenway Bowl because doing a game at Fenway Park would be cool.
Yeah, wouldn't you rather do one in July though, like a nice baseball game or something?
Yeah, sure, but that's the big leagues, So that's the closest we'll get to Fenway Park.
This leads into the tangent that we can do some other time about how the bowl games need to be played week 1 or week 0.
Week 0, yeah. Nobody opts out.
Warm weather.
You base the bowl games on like a 5-year coefficient of how teams done in the past, and that sets your matchups.
That's a whole nother podcast.
And then everybody takes December off except for the playoff teams.
Well, someone tee up a Friday question about
But I
that
did.
for Chris.
That's where I answered it in Q&A this past
perfect.
Friday. Yeah.
Beautiful. Well, I think with that wraps it up for episode 390 of the Tech Sideline podcast. For Nick Brown behind the scenes, Mustache Man, as always, I don't even think we introduced him. How rude of us today.
Our director of media.
Yeah, our director of media.
Put his hat up there. There we go.
There we go. There we go. For David Cunningham, for Chris Coleman, I'm Giovanni Heater saying so long. We'll talk to you later this week.